Mozzarella has to be one of the most deceptive cheeses there is. There's traditional style and 30-minute. Some say it's easy, and others say it's almost impossible. It's a solid, but it can also behave like a liquid, taking any form it wants, almost like a ditto of the cheese world, but why? Hello shepherds, welcome back. And if you're new here, this is where we talk all things sheepy. My name is Megan, and today we're talking about mozzarella. I want to take the fear out of this cheese so that when you're pouring your hard-earned milk into that pot, you'll not only get a beautiful cheese, but cheese that you'll crave. So what makes mozzarella so special? Mozzarella is a type of pasta filata cheese, and just like any other cheese, it starts off as milk, and with a little bit of heat and cultures, the cheese curd is formed and mixed and stretched and then kneaded. Through this process, it's transformed through a plasticizing treatment into the stretchy, bouncy cheese that we know and love today. Okay, so this recipe is inspired by Jim Wallace's famous traditional mozzarella technique. And like most pasta filata type cheeses, it uses a form of acidity to give our cheeses that classic stretch. But unlike the 30-minute mozzarella that gets its acidity from adding in vinegar or citric acid or some other type of acid, the slow and low method of traditional mozzarella making makes use of our specific cultured bacteria in our milk to naturally acidify our milk and then also flavor our cheese. On that note, this is a micro-batch recipe, and when making micro-batches of cheese, it's really important that you get yourself a scale. We're working in like micrometers, but one of the tools that we don't need that is optional is a pH meter. And then also, next up, probably the most important step to make sure that your cheese is a success is to source the right type of milk. This is the foundation of our cheese, and if you only have store-bought milk available, that's okay. It's trickier because there's so much variation to milk treatments that makes fine drinking or even a great yogurt, but for cheese, it just falls apart, literally. Okay, so stay away from ultra-pasteurized milk. Homogenized milk can work, but some store-bought milks are heat-treated or pasteurized almost to the point of ultra-pasteurized milk. This ends up denaturing their proteins, and it's not something that's listed on the label often. So there's a lot of trial by error, trial by fire type of effect that you may end up experiencing. This ends up making the curds to be really soft, prone to breaking, and even with homogenized store-bought milk, the curds tend to be ultra soft and prone to breaking. To combat some of these problems, it helps add some calcium chloride back in, but even so, store-bought milk tends to make a very, very soft curd. And also, some animals give a firmer curd than others. Sheep in particular give a really dramatic, firm curd and high cheese yield. So for this video, I'm using our late lactation fresh sheep's milk. You can also use this with previously frozen milk, mixed species, or lactation stages. I used to know someone who used to flex their buffalo milk, and they knew it was amazing and rare in our region. And it was a really great selling point for the buffaloes. But really, the best quality milk that you can find works. This is a micro-batch recipe, so you have room to play around and make multiple cheeses if you want to. I'm interested in preserving the flavor of the earth or terroir in our cheese, so I'm not heat treating it. But if you want to have a more consistent flavor from cheese to cheese, it helps to mix milk types, lactation stages, and also heat treat or lightly pasteurize your milk, and then add in that specific culture back in. There's a lot of leeway in cheese making. And that's both part of the fun, but also a lot of the challenge. Remember, our ancestors, yours included, made cheeses without tech. Just trial and error and using their senses to make delicious cheeses. And if they did it, so can you. So when making this cheese, I mentioned earlier we don't need a pH meter, but I'll have the information in this recipe if you like using it. I have a meter, but I find it easier just to do this intuitively. But we'll also need some rennet. I'm using single strength animal rennet that's commonly found in the stores around here. We'll also need a thermophilia culture. One of your favorite live cultures, just a spoonful works really well. A colander, a pot, a spoon, and time. So one of the biggest problems I've had with traditional mozzarella is that the time commitment required. It doesn't need a lot of babysitting so much, but it does require a long time for the acidity to naturally develop. Anywhere from 2 to 5 hours or more. And there's stop points, which I'll point out, where it's okay, to go pick up your kids from club, or, oh no, it's late and I'm tired. Can't we finish this tomorrow? Yes, you can. I've stopped at every point, life happens, and it still makes cheese. The texture may be off for some points more than others, but start to finish, this style mozzarella can take all afternoon. So clear out your afternoon from say noonish all the way to early evening abouts. So let's go ahead and jump right into it by heating up our milk to 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 to 38 degrees Celsius. So a little bit more than body temperature warm, or bathwater warm maybe. It depends on how serene you like your bathwater, I guess. Make sure to stir regularly. This helps prevent hot spots and promotes even heating. And if you want to put your milk in a water bath for a more relaxed technique, that works really well too. Once our milk reaches our target temperature, we're going to add in our culture. If you have yogurt, a spoonful is enough. I like to play around with this a lot. Some days I like to use an ice cube of whey from a previous batch, but if you want to use powders, that works as well. When making micro batches, we really want to use just such a small amount, almost like a dusting. Most mozzarellas use thermophilic culture. I like to use a combination of cultures. We all have our favorite flavor types, and we all have our favorite types of cultures. If you're using lipase powder, go ahead and add it in now, but the amount is really up to your preference. This is a fresh cheese, so it's okay to add a little bit more than if you're using it for an aged cheese where it tends to concentrate over time. And let's see, and don't forget to add in your calcium chloride at this time too if you're using the late lactation stage, if you're using store-bought, or like a really old milk that you had frozen and then maybe it turns out it's a little bit past the time that it should be frozen. Go ahead and add in that calcium chloride. It doesn't hurt, it's just calcium. So we're gonna stir in all of our cultures in really well and then cover our pot and let it incubate for about 60 minutes. And then after 60 minutes, we're gonna take off our cover, and at this stage, there's gonna be less flexibility for distractions. But if it happens, it's okay, it happens to all of us eventually. So we're gonna need to be around to mind the cheese. But let's go ahead and measure our rennet. I'm using our single strength liquid rennet, and it's such a tiny amount. And when we dilute our rennet, we're going to dilute it in non-chlorinated water because the chlorination can actually mess with the strength of our rennet. I live out in the boondocks, so for me, it's well water. I tend to use a lot of water. It gets leached out or evaporated out if we're making brunos. So the main thing is that we want to disperse our rennet so it doesn't get a coagulation clump when the rennet makes contact with the milk. So let's make sure to really well combine our rennet into our milk by stirring in a very haphazard and chaotic method, up and down and around, and making sure that our rennet makes contact with all parts of our pot and milk. And so stirring continuously for about 30 seconds. And then we're going to replace our lid back onto our pot. And since it's deep winter here and the cabin gets really drafty, I want to preserve our heat and put our pot in a warm water bath, about 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius. If you're worried about temperature or using a really thin metal type of pot, it also helps to use a water bath to just get that thermal insulation. Or if you have a warm spot that's stable, like on the fireplace or whatnot, just to stabilize your temperature in our ideal temperature range. We're going to let our milk rest like this for about 30 minutes to 45 minutes before we come and check to see how our curds are coagulating. After about 30 to 45 minutes, let's start checking our curds for a clean break. Now before I start cutting, I want to mention this. If you find your curds too soft or mushy even, it's okay to wait, say like 10 minutes or more, and let them firm up some more. If you come back and find your whey pooling on the surface of the curds, it may be a bit overdone, but it still works. So when I cut, I'm going to go ahead and slice in my knife and then lift up. I'm looking at the cut and seeing what type of cut do we have. Is it a clean cut? Is it sharp? How is the curds holding up? Are they firm? Are the edges jagged? Sometimes the best you may get is a rough, jagged edge, especially like with store-bought milk or if you're using a really old frozen milk. I've done that before and I've gotten the jagged edge. It'll still make mozzarella and stretch out, but I find the yield tends to be a little bit more low on that one and the texture not as buttery as when using a fresher milk. It'll still make a tasty cheese, but if you look closely here, we have a really nice, clean break. And so we're going to cut across our pot, making sure that our knife makes contact with the bottom of our pot. We're going to cut in about 1/2 inch or almost the size of a chestnut or a kumquat maybe. If you want to dry your cheese, cut smaller bits, and more whey will end up expelling from our curds, which will end up resulting in our final cheese being drier. For a moisture cheese, we want to prevent too much moisture loss, so we want to cut bigger. Also, I like to cut across the top and then wait about 5 minutes to let our cuts heal, and then cross cut again. Some people like to cut across all the way. That'll yield in a drier cheese, and that's okay if that's something you want. I want a little bit of a moisture cheese, so I'm going to wait my 5 minutes and then cut again across the entire pot. And then we're going to wait another 3 to 5 minutes. And this step is to prevent too much moisture loss. If we end up going in and start stirring right away, we'll really end up losing a lot of the whey in our cheese. When we let our cheese heal, it results in a softer, creamier cheese. Okay, now that our curds are cut, let's go ahead and start cooking our curds. Here, we need to lock in. So over the course of the next 60 minutes, we want to gently and briefly stir our curds. It'll be tough to stir at first if you're using sheep's milk. Store-bought milk curds tend to be softer, so it may look differently than what I'm showing here, but that's okay. Just make sure to work gently, and to help those curds keep their integrity, we want to stir in brief spurts, softly every few minutes. When we're stirring our curds, we're making sure that they're not knitting together and releasing their whey evenly and thoroughly. If you come back and you find that your curds are knitting together at the bottom pot, or maybe you missed a spot, that's okay. We can find that clump. It helps to use your hand and break that clump up and then put back into the whey. During this time, we want to maintain our temperatures between 96 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 36 to 38 degrees Celsius. If you want a drier cheese, work a little bit warmer and your curds will end up releasing a bit more whey. So between 106 to 108 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 to 42 degrees Celsius. For a drier cheese, we want to stir more often. For a moisture cheese, we want to stir gently, softly, and less regularly, but not to the point where we have an unbreakable clump. After about an hour, our curds are going to shrink down dramatically from when we first started. There still should be a milky, clean, fresh, crisp notes to the air, nothing musty or barny. These curds will have a beautiful bounce when they're pressed and shouldn't explode or shatter. So now that our curds are of the texture that we want, we're going to go ahead and drain our curds. But also we need to keep our curds warm. This is because the cultured bacteria needs time to produce that acid that's really important to give our curds that classic traditional mozzarella stretch. This can take a few hours, but the big hurdle of cooking our curds, that one's over. If you need to take a break soon, it'll be okay. Okay, so depending on how much culture that you initially added, some people like to add a lot of culture. This can acidify your cheese a lot faster. I like to dust mine on and then go low and slow, so I use less culture. It causes a longer incubation time. So let's go ahead and talk about incubation setup. In the warmer areas such as the tropics, I tend to have a problem of too much heat because the house is just naturally at optimal incubation temperatures. But up in the frozen north, I found this method of nestling pots works really well. So in a larger pot, I add 2 weights to raise my container of curds up out of the water. Anything you can scrounge that's heat safe works really well. I have a ricotta basket nestled into a Tupperware to catch my whey because I'm going to use that whey for later. If you don't want to reserve your whey, you don't have to. A colander lined with a cheesecloth also works really well. Most importantly, we just want a form that will fit into our larger pot up out of the water. If you have a steamer pot lined with a cheesecloth, that will work well too. I'm going to be using a slotted spoon and just trying to reserve as much whey as possible. This is a sweet whey, so it's perfect for making ricotta and then also some brunost as well. So I have some other videos where we discussed ricotta making and how to make your own brunost. You're welcome to go and check it out, but we're going to go ahead and continue on talking about our traditional mozzarella here. So once we've moved all of our curds over, we're going to have these curds settle down and knit together a bit. This is time for our curds to ripen, so I'm going to use our kettle to warm up some water, just enough to cover the bottom of our pot, but not enough to submerge our curds. The water temp is about 96 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 to 38 degrees Celsius. I like to check the water temperature and curds temp as well regularly while they're incubating, and when the water cools down too much, I just go ahead and change that water out with some more warm water. This really depends on what type of environment you're working in. We're in the midst of winter right now, so it's a little bit more changing going on than in different seasons. I've had this step regularly take 2 or more hours, So if you're using a pH meter, we want to do this step until our curds have a pH of about 5.1 to 5.3. But if you're doing this the old-fashioned way, after about an hour and a half or 2 hours, I like to start testing our cheese curds. So to test our curds, we'll need a small container of hot water that was brought up to a light simmer, and we're just going to grab a little curd and then dip it in our hot water, and then once our curd is thoroughly warmed up, see if it gives a good stretch. If it doesn't, then I give the curd mass another 15 or 30 minutes or more to incubate before trying the step again. This one's giving me the cue to stretch. I know that we have curds that reach the right level of acidity for a tasty mozzarella with this. And if you're wondering what I do with the test bits, I just eat them. They're ready, and it's important to sample your work as you go. So also at this point, if you need to stop and take a break, it's okay. I've done this before too many times. Sometimes after they pass the stretch test, I pop them into the fridge and then get on with my day or go to bed, and then pull it out the next day when we're ready to our stretch. You can also slice this and store the curds like this in the freezer and then defrost and stretch them at a later date as well. The only thing I just wouldn't do is leave it in the fridge for say a week in this state, as they tend to go sour then. So let's go ahead and talk some more about stretching while I cut up these curds and pop them in more water. Okay, so this step can cause a lot of pain for folks. And not just physically, that's a given, but emotionally too. Ideally, we want to test our curd to stretch about 2 to 3 times its original length without breaking. If the curd isn't warmed up thoroughly, it won't stretch fully. So it's really important to work warm, like very warm. But this can also be very hard on your hands. I've never found gloves to really help with this step, but I have found that moving quickly, using utensils like spoons, and also having a bowl of ice water to dip your fingers in really help to keep the pain bearable. I've also done this with kids, and I just keep the water much cooler. You won't get as good of a stretch, but it's still really tasty nonetheless. Also, you only really need to stretch a couple times, and you're good to go. So about 2 to 3 stretches. And if you've made the quick mozzarella before, you might instantly notice the difference in the feeling of the curds themselves. They feel softer, butterier. The texture is similar to a feeling maybe of like a high gluten bread dough. Visually, it kind of looks the same to me as like a quick mozzarella. Let me know what you think. But texture-wise, it's noticeably softer. And also on the note for visuals, often for the camera, I've done it before where you're trying to stretch and get that big stretch for a frame, or if the kids are helping making the cheese, there tends to be a lot more stretching going on at colder temperatures than is needed. So what that does is we'll dry out the cheese a little bit more, and it can make it a bit more rubberier, but it will still be full of flavor from that incubation time. And when it's melted and gooey, it's like not as noticeable that it's rubbery, especially when you have kids' fingers touching it. So in warming up these curds, it only takes a few minutes. As the curds heat up, they'll start to stretch even as you stir it. And it only takes 2 to 3 pulls, and then you can shape it into a nice tight ball. Or during this time too, if you want to add in salt, go ahead, or herbs too. While it's still pretty pliable, it's a good time to put in our additions, and then once it's stretched out, we're going to add it into our bowl of ice water. For today's mozzarella, I'm putting it in our bunny mold, and then into the snow to chill quickly. Mozzarella is so fun in that it can really take almost any form, but it can slowly slump until it's fully chilled, which is fun, but has also caused some unfortunate shapes. So when choosing molds, some shapes are easier. I wanted to experiment with the bunnies. If you've ever made resin molds or worked in casting, there are some shapes that tend to be trickier. I found with mozzarella, it really helps to work very hot, also avoid undercuts. Cookie cutters with an open face and open bottom work really well in shaping mozzarella, as well as some ice cube forms. If you end up playing around though, I'm not sure if YouTube allows photo posts. I thought it does, but I'd love to see your cheeses. To store long term, I'm freezing some of these bunnies wholes, and the mutants are going to get sliced and shredded, then frozen into portion sizes to sprinkle. These are best eaten within a few days, and if they're stored in the fridge, lightly wrapped to prevent drying out and to develop too much of a rind. So I think that pretty much covers the big bets in terms of yield. Because it's a sheep's milk base, I'm getting around a 25% yield, so for about 4 pounds or 8 kilograms of milk, anywhere from 1 to 2 pounds even, or 2 to 4 kilograms. Store-bought yields traditionally yield lower, but you should still get enough for pizza. plus extra. If you find your yields too low, it's really important to troubleshoot your process from start to finish, barn to table if you have an animal, but there's a lot of places it can go wrong. But once you work through all those wrinkles, it gets easier, and the main thing to ensure your success is through the quality of your milk. The bulk of the errors that I've seen is due to either an overcooked or overpasteurized milk, and also on the opposite end of the spectrum, contaminated milk. So switching brands of milk helps if you're buying it, and if it's your own milk, it really helps to become a detective of your own flock. Okay, so thank you so much for watching, and happy cheese making. If you've made it this far, leave me an emoji of the dairy animal that you're using or a combination thereof. Also, let me know, what's the weirdest animal you've ever milked? I know my extended family has, in no uncertain terms, vocally asserted how weird sheep's milk is, especially when I first started milking my sheep. But I've seen weirder, so weirdos, let me know. But also, did you make any cheese out of it? If you've made it this far, an extra special thank you. I try to read and reply to each of your comments, and I just want to let you know that I appreciate you. And if you enjoy diving into the sheep side of the dairy world, hit that subscribe button and the bell, where we explore a sheep-focused lifestyle every week. Ta-tas!